Valerie Bertinelli thought she was untouchable. For nearly a decade, she became one of the most beloved faces on the Food Network, carrying hit shows while quietly enduring heartbreak behind the cameras. She believed loyalty still meant something in television. Then everything ended with a single message. No phone call. Just a cold text that slammed the door shut on an entire chapter of her career. For Valerie, the betrayal cut deeper because she had spent years building something authentic on the network during one of the hardest periods of her life. But behind the scenes, Food Network was already changing. Executives wanted younger talent, a completely different future. And almost overnight, Valerie Bertinelli became one of the biggest casualties of that transformation. The career before the kitchen. Valerie Bertinelli was born on April 23, 1960, in Wilmington, Delaware, into a family that moved constantly because of her father Andrew's career at General Motors. Delaware gave way to Michigan, Louisiana, Oklahoma City, and eventually Los Angeles, city after city before the age of 10. That kind of upbringing either breaks a child or builds enormous adaptability, and in Bertinelli's case, it built both. The family was Roman Catholic, close-knit, and grounded in the kind of values that later showed up in every single thing Bertinelli put on camera. At 15 years old, Bertinelli landed the role of Barbara Cooper in the sitcom One Day at a Time in 1975. 2 Golden Globe Awards for Best Supporting Actress followed. That level of recognition at that age is extraordinary by any measure, and the warmth Bertinelli brought to Barbara Cooper planted the foundation of how audiences would relate to Bertinelli for the next 5 decades. Adult roles came steadily. Gloria, in Touched by an Angel, Melanie Moretti in Hot in Cleveland, which ran from 2010 to 2015 and earned a Screen Actors Guild Award nomination. A star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame arrived in 2012. Long before the Food Network, Bertinelli had already built a career that most performers would consider complete. The cooking world was not a second act born from desperation. It was a genuine passion that happened to find an enormous audience at exactly the right moment. But building that Food Network presence took years of quiet, dedicated work that most people never fully appreciated until it was gone. What Valerie built at the Food Network. Valerie Bertinelli joined the Food Network in 2015, launching a show called Valerie's Home Cooking. The concept was straightforward and entirely genuine. Bertinelli cooked food from her actual life, shared stories about family and memory and the meaning behind certain dishes, and treated the audience the same way a trusted friend would treat a guest at a kitchen table. No performance, no theatrics, just cooking with warmth and real conversation baked into every episode. The show ran for 14 seasons. That length is not an accident. Television shows do not sustain 14 seasons unless the audience is genuinely returning week after week, year after year, because something real is happening on screen. In the same year, Bertinelli joined Kids Baking Championship as co-host alongside cake artist Duff Goldman. The show placed children in baking competitions and required exactly the kind of patient, encouraging, emotionally intelligent hosting that Bertinelli brought naturally. For a woman who had raised a son and spent decades understanding how to make people feel comfortable on camera, the fit was immediate and obvious. 2 Daytime Emmy Awards for Outstanding Culinary Host followed for Valerie's Home Cooking. Then 2 more Food Network shows arrived in 2019: Family Food Showdown and Family Restaurant Rivals. By 2018, the Food Network signed Bertinelli to a multi-series exclusive deal. The network was essentially saying that Bertinelli was a cornerstone of their identity, not just a host, but a face that audiences associated with the entire experience of watching food television. That deal would later become the center of everything. Because what happened to that deal is where the real story begins, and it starts with a corporate earthquake nobody outside of boardrooms fully understood. On April 8, 2022, Discovery and Kraken created a merger with Warner Media, the entertainment division that owned the Food Network. The new company became Warner Bros. Discovery, one of the largest media conglomerates in the world. On paper, the merger made sense as a business strategy. Two major media companies are combining resources, reducing overlapping costs, and positioning to compete against Netflix and other streaming giants. In practice, the merger meant something very specific for every single person at every single channel under the combined umbrella. Overhead was about to be cut aggressively, and talent contracts were about to be scrutinized at a level that had not happened under the previous structure. The executives at the Food Network, who had shaped the network's identity over the previous decade, who had built relationships with talent like Bertinelli and understood what those relationships represented for the audience, were among the first to leave during the restructuring. When the leadership that championed a specific vision departs, the people who champion that vision become vulnerable immediately. Bertinelli's multi-series deal, originally signed in 2018 and set to expire in 2021, was extended by 1 year under the old regime. That extension ran out in 2022, directly coinciding with the new leadership that had arrived through the merger and had no particular investment in the deals the previous team had made. The timing was not a coincidence. The deal expiration hit at the exact moment when new leadership, under pressure to reduce costs and reshape programming strategy, was making decisions about which talent represented the future of the network and which represented an older vision. Bertinelli represented warmth, education, and genuine cooking content. The new vision had different priorities entirely. Because the direction the Food Network was heading in 2022 was not subtle, and it had been building for years before the merger accelerated everything. The end of Food Network's golden era. The Food Network launched in 1993, with a single clear purpose: teaching people how to cook. Shows like 30-Minute Meals, Good Eats, and Barefoot Contessa defined the channel for over a decade. Personalities like Rachel Ray, Alton Brown, Ina Garten, and later Rachel Ray built audiences that came to the network specifically to learn something. The relationship between viewer and host was built on trust and knowledge transfer. Audiences returned because they left each episode knowing more than when they started. That model gradually eroded as competition programming proved cheaper to produce and generated higher short-term ratings. Chopped, Big Bobby Flay, and the endless parade of baking championships delivered drama, elimination, and spectacle. The educational cooking show required a skilled presenter, a tested format, and genuine production investment. The competition show required a kitchen, a timer, and mystery ingredients. Food bloggers, longtime viewers, and former hosts began voicing the same concern in 2022 and 2023. The network that once taught the country how to cook had become a channel of endless competition, drama, and repetitive formats that served advertisers more than audiences. Bertinelli herself joined that chorus in April 2024, responding to a food blogger on Threads who lamented the shift. Bertinelli agreed that the golden era of educational cooking content on the channel had ended, and that the pivot away from those shows reflected a business decision that came at the cost of something genuinely valuable. For viewers who had watched Valerie's home cooking for 14 seasons, that observation was not abstract. The cancellation of that show was the most concrete proof available that the shift was real. But while all of that industry machinery was grinding forward, Bertinelli was privately living through something that made the professional changes feel even heavier. In the summer of 2022, Bertinelli filmed what would become Season 11 and Season 12 of Kids Baking Championship back-to-back. Those seasons, which aired through early 2024, were filmed during what Bertinelli later described publicly as her apex year of hell. That phrase was not a dramatic exaggeration. The timeline of what Bertinelli was managing privately during those filming months is genuinely staggering. In October 2020, Eddie Van Halen, the legendary rock musician and Bertinelli's first husband, died at age 65 after a long battle with cancer. Van Halen and Bertinelli had divorced in 2007 after 26 years of marriage, but the bond between them remained significant. Bertinelli described the grief as both devastating and complicated, because the relationship had evolved into a deep friendship by the time of his death. Then the second marriage collapsed. Bertinelli and financial planner Tom Vitale had married on January 1, 2011, but the separation was filed in November 2021, and the divorce proceedings continued through 2022. Bertinelli described the Vitale marriage in later interviews as toxic, a word that carries considerable weight when applied to a decade-long partnership. By November 22, 2022, the divorce was finalized. Bertinelli described that day publicly as the second best day of her life, a statement that speaks volumes about how damaging the marriage had become. Filming a children's baking competition with genuine warmth and patience while simultaneously grieving a former love and finalizing a difficult divorce required a level of professional composure that most people will never be asked to demonstrate. Bertinelli brought that composure every single day on set. The audience watching those seasons had no idea what was happening behind them. And then, before the pain had even fully settled, the news about her contract arrived through the worst possible channel imaginable. The text message. In January 2024, Valerie Bertinelli confirmed publicly what had happened behind the scenes at the end of 2022. The Food Network had not called. Management had not requested a meeting. No conversation happened between Bertinelli and network leadership about the future. The confirmation that Bertinelli would not be returning to Kids Baking Championship for a 13th season arrived through a third party, communicated via text message. For someone who had spent nearly a decade as a cornerstone of the network, who had won 2 Daytime Emmy Awards for the channel, who had hosted a show that ran for 14 seasons, the method of communication was a specific kind of dismissal. It communicated something beyond the contract decision itself. It communicated how much the institution valued the relationship that had been built. Bertinelli posted an Instagram video on January 20, 2024, addressing the situation with complete honesty. The decision was acknowledged as business-related, described as likely the result of budget cuts within the new corporate structure. The hurt feelings were also acknowledged without apology, because the hurt was genuine and Bertinelli had no interest in pretending otherwise. Celebrity support arrived immediately. Khloe Kardashian and Mark Hamill were among those who publicly expressed solidarity. Fans who had watched Valerie's home cooking for years flooded comment sections with frustration about the departure. The response revealed something important. The audience had not been indifferent to the educational cooking content that the network had been quietly retiring. And the insight that most coverage of this story never reached is what that audience response actually proved about the industry decision being made. The thing Food Network didn't realize they were losing. The coverage of Bertinelli's Food Network exit focused almost entirely on the budget cuts angle and the contract negotiation details. What the coverage missed was the bigger picture. Bertinelli was not simply a talent whose deal was too expensive. Bertinelli represented a specific kind of television relationship that the post-merger Food Network had decided to deprioritize the parasocial warmth of genuine educational cooking content built around a trusted, consistent personality over many years. That model of television builds audiences differently from competition programming. Competition shows generate spikes of engagement around eliminations and drama. Educational cooking shows with warm hosts build deep habitual loyalty. Viewers do not simply watch those shows, they organize their schedules around them. They reference the recipes years later, and they feel a genuine connection to the person in the kitchen. The 14-season run of Valerie's home cooking and the 12-season partnership on Kids Baking Championship had built exactly that kind of loyalty. When Bertinelli was removed, the audience reaction was not a casual disappointment. It was the response of people who had genuinely been losing something that had become part of their routine. The new Food Network, under Warner Bros. Discovery's financial pressure to reduce costs and chase competitive programming ratings,